I think some people take issue with the fact that in the past few years or so, I've become a lot more open about my personal health, whether it be my mental or my physical health. It's reached a point where if someone says, "How are you?" I give them the honest answer, which most people don't really want to hear. I think we've become used to pretending that everything's okay, that we aren't all going through things. And I think the issue with this attitude that a lot of people have is we find it more difficult to empathise with people because we struggle to go, oh, well, that person suffers with the same thing that I suffer with. Because a lot of people are so guarded about their issues or their health that it reaches a point where so many people are suffering from the same thing but are acting like everything's fine when it's not, and it just spirals out of control. I think the catalyst for my sudden openness about my health stemmed from being diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. It's something that I've suffered with from the age of 9, and I'm now 22. So that's a good 13 plus years where I've suffered with this condition that I've only been diagnosed with for the past year, the past past 2 years. So 2 years ago I got diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And the main reason I got an official diagnosis rather than it just being, oh, well, we're not sure, was because I was taking a break from university because my physical health reached a point where it was impacting my mental health and I couldn't be at university both physically, mentally and emotionally. So they needed some sort of reason that wasn't wishy-washy as to why I had to take a break from my studies. And so I went to my doctor and said, okay, here's a list of symptoms that I have. Here's a list of symptoms that people with chronic fatigue syndrome have. Pretty much the same. And you can check my medical notes and you'll realise that I have chronic fatigue syndrome and I need a diagnosis. And so my GP looked at the list and within a day, official diagnosis. And for a lot of people that's not easy to get a diagnosis so abruptly, particularly with a condition where there's no one test to diagnose you with it. It's essentially they test you for every other disease and infection and virus under the sun. They check. I've been tested for Crohn's, irritable bowel syndrome, neurological disorders, all sorts of things since the age of 9. And it wasn't until me approaching my doctor saying I have this disorder that they went, oh, I think she does. And it's only been since then that I've been more willing to be open about all of my symptoms and how they impact my daily life. Because before that diagnosis, I always downplayed my symptoms. If somebody asked me how I was doing, I'd say, yeah, I'm fine, just tired. And that's always a word that crops up. I'm tired. At school, some days I wouldn't go into school because I was tired, and a lot of my classmates didn't understand that, because they'd be like, oh, well, I didn't sleep last night, or oh, I only had 2 or 3 hours of sleep, but I'd still made it in. And I couldn't understand that, because I was like, no, but I was tired. I literally couldn't move from my bed, because even the idea of standing up and getting dressed exhausted me. So the actual act of doing it would just be unbelievably overwhelming. And trying to describe that to a bunch of 13-year-olds was an impossible task for somebody who was also 13 years old. So I was never fully honest and open about my symptoms. And because I wasn't like that with my peers, I also wasn't really like that with my family. I was a little more open about certain symptoms, about stomach aches and all that sort of thing, but the sheer number of symptoms, I almost convinced myself that a lot of them I was just imagining, because there were so many of them, and they impacted every little bit of my life. And so when I'd go into the GP office and they'd be like, well, how are you doing? I couldn't just sit there and list my symptoms, because I convinced myself that a lot of what I was thinking and feeling wasn't real. And that was because I'd never truly voiced them. I'd never understood that other people were suffering with the same symptoms that I was. And so when I got that diagnosis, I suddenly thought, okay, I now know why I have these symptoms. I can go online and I can see what it's like for other people. And I witnessed people who were bedridden, who couldn't move, they couldn't feed themselves. But then on the other side of the spectrum, there were people who could live practically normal lives and have relatively normal jobs and social lives, and they still had the same thing as me. And in some ways that really helped. In other ways it made me worry a bit, but it opened my mind up to the idea that actually, no matter what I'm suffering, there's probably somebody else somewhere sat there thinking, oh, nobody else is suffering like this, when actually they are. And so the idea of being more open about how I was thinking and feeling, not just relating to chronic fatigue syndrome, opened me up to my mental health. And it was something that I'd never properly dealt with. Pretty much since I first began to show the signs of chronic fatigue syndrome, this unknown disease that I was suffering with made my anxiety go haywire, to the point where when I was in year 6, and well, in fact, when I was in year 5 and a year away from taking my final exams, I was having a complete meltdown over the idea of not getting the grades that I wanted. And that wasn't a matter of me thinking that I couldn't, or that I didn't have the ability to. It was just this sheer level of panic that I couldn't explain. And looking back, that is anxiety. That was my 9-year-old self being overwhelmed with the idea of, well, if I don't do this, then that won't happen, and then I'll never be able to live a happy life. And it would be a spiral of unhelpful and unhealthy thoughts. And so when I began to open up to the idea I can talk about my mental health, I began talking with a lot of my friends who were also struggling with talking about their mental health. Most of them hadn't even spoken much with their own family about what was going on inside of their mind. A lot of them had never spoken to their GP about it. And I don't know. I think I found some level of comfort in the fact that I wasn't alone in all my worries. What am I doing? Being able to be honest about your anxieties and possibly even more so your depression can go, even just talking about it can go such a long way. I've always had this issue with trying to separate all the different problems that I have, both physically and mentally, with my health. And I feel like the symptoms are all intertwined, and that it's almost impossible to deal with all of them as they are, but at the same time to deal with each individual part separately is just as difficult. And so I've always been in limbo about how to deal with symptoms and how to live a better and healthier life, both for my benefit and for everybody around me. And with having chronic fatigue syndrome, I think it hinders a lot of the generic processes in overcoming certain core parts of anxiety and depression to make them a lot more manageable. I mean, things like exercise. Exercise is supposed to be really, really good for people who are having really depressive thoughts. Going out and going even for a walk, or for a cycle, or going for a swim. These are all things I would love to do, but I can't. And so the past couple of years, it's been a matter of how can I do those sorts of things that bring me that level of joy without having to leave my house. Because for the most part, I am housebound. I can venture out. A few weeks ago, I went to Manchester for 3 days, but for a week solid afterwards, I was just lying in bed in agony because all my muscles ached and my glands were swelling and my stomach was all over the place. I couldn't eat properly. But the thing is for the most part, most people only ever see the part of, oh, she went to Manchester for 3 days, she must be fine. But they don't see the week afterwards where I'm suffering, and it's difficult. It's really difficult. Because, particularly with something like social media, because I love taking photos, I'll take photos of all these amazing places that I get to visit, places I get to go on holiday with my family, or just day trips that I can afford on my own. And I love sharing all these amazing places that I see because I just see the beauty in leaves or a weird sign or an 18th century building. I love taking photos of all that kind of stuff. But the problem is the moment I've put that on my Instagram feed, people are going to go, oh yeah, she's out of the house again, she can't be that unwell. When a day trip to London means I'm lying in bed for 3 days afterwards, not being able to eat, not being able to sleep, despite the fact I'm exhausted. And I can't put that on Instagram. I've tried. I've taken photos of the view from my bed, but it's never quite as aesthetically pleasing, doesn't get quite as many likes. Recently I've just resorted to posting photos of my cats because at least that's something for them to like that doesn't involve some sort of sob story from me about the fact that I haven't left the house in 4 days or even had a shower in 4 days. There's tough. I don't want people to pity me though. This is the thing. I just want people to understand that this disease that I have isn't something that I came up with overnight. It's not something that I've carefully planned so I can cancel plans whenever I like if I can't be bothered to get dressed. For the most part, I have to cancel so many social plans. And it hurts, but no one gets to see that. No one gets to see me sobbing in my bed because I haven't seen my best friend in over a year because I can't leave the house. And she's off having adventures. Just sucks sometimes. I just want people to understand that it's not just laziness. It's not a lot of things that what people think it is. It's cruel. I think that's why the movie Unrest resonated with me so much. It showed how so many people don't believe the sort of trials and tribulations we have to go through daily. The matter of, do I shower today or do I go outside? It's not I'll do one and then the other. It's, I can only do one today. That's not laziness. Having to cancel your own birthday party after 3+ months of planning and exciting conversations with all your friends you haven't seen in months, having to cancel that's not laziness. There was a part of Unrest that I think resonated with me the most, particularly when I was very depressed, and that was that the thing with chronic fatigue syndrome is that we're not dying, but this doesn't feel like living. And when I heard that, my mum was sat next to me and we both just started crying because that's how you feel. For the most part, I don't feel that most days anymore. I'm on medication, so I don't get the depressive thoughts as much, but some days I just sit there and think, if I wasn't suffering, if I could do what I wanted right now, if I could join a gym and go swimming every day, I would. But I can't. I've tried. I joined a gym last year and I went for 2 weeks and it completely wiped me out, and I haven't been back since because I can't. I think that's the message. I just want people to understand that I've had people say to me that I talk about chronic fatigue syndrome and the fact that I have it all the time as if it's like my whole world, but it is. That's the harsh reality of it. I can't just pretend for a moment that I don't have it. It's not like I can just click my fingers and make it go away for a bit just so I can do something that I want to do. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. I'll be alright though. I've got support. I've got medication. I've got doctors that are trying to help me. It's not a cure, but there's coping mechanisms and symptom management, and that makes it easier. It makes it feel more like living, for the most part. I can enjoy the small things a lot more. I think I've gained a level of appreciation for a lot of things that most people just don't have. I don't know why I made this video. I couldn't sleep. Another symptom of chronic fatigue syndrome. Forever feel exhausted, forever struggling to sleep. But I think this helped a bit. It's like a therapy session, except I don't have to pay for it. But hopefully if anybody watches this, if I ever upload it anywhere, that there will be some comfort to somebody or some new level of understanding for somebody else, or both. That's all I can really ask. It's helping me to talk about it, so if it helps anyone else for me to talk about it to them, then it's welcomed.